Yes, people, how we all doing? Hope everyone is fit and well. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about what happens to police officers in prison. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because the views on these sort of videos seem to be the highest, and this is what you lot at home like to see. Now, the two that I'm going to be talking about in this episode are Dennis Jaffa and Jamie Lewis. Now, these two will be out of prison by now because they did get relatively short sentences. But I'm going to delve into a little bit about the case, about why they got sentenced, and the case that they were supposed to be looking into. But as you'll see by some of my last videos from last week, a lot of my subscribers thought that I was no longer doing videos this way, and I was doing them more so the way that I was doing them last week if you've been watching my channel, where it was mostly just visuals and you didn't see me talking. But I will be covering both ways because I've got loads of content coming up. But let's get into the video. So Dennis Jaffa and Jamie Lewis were sentenced to 2 years and 9 months. Now, if you see us keep looking down, obviously I've got my laptop in front of us just to keep an eye on the details of the case so I don't miss out any important factors. So the reason why these two officers were sentenced was because they were supposed to, or they were, guarding the bodies of two females who had been killed. And they went on to take photographs of these women whilst they were lying there dead. They even went on to move the bodies around so they could get different pictures of these victims that were lying on the floor. Then they went on to share the images around the different colleagues on a WhatsApp group. But one of the officers that was in the group obviously didn't agree with what was going on and reported them, and subsequently they got found out and they got sentenced. So it says on here that the former PCs were guarding the crime scene at Friant Country Park in Wembley in June 2020, where the two women were found. So while at the park, the two PCs left their posts to take the photos of the sisters. And the two sisters in question are Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman. And I'll go into a little bit about the case, but obviously the nature of this video is about these two ex-police officers. I'm talking about what happens to them in prison because they have actually been attacked in prison. And this is what popped up at first when I was researching different stories. And it came up and said the headline of the story was "Police Officers Attacked in Prison." But the other reason why it popped up as well was because they were actually appealing against their sentences. I'll get a little bit more into the case. So the former police officers jailed for taking pictures of two murdered sisters at a crime scene they were protecting have been attacked in prison. So they went up to appeal against the sentences because they were trying to say the sentences were too severe. I mean, 2 years and 9 months, you serve what? 1 year, 4.5 months, so you're talking like, what's that, 70 weeks? Something along them lines. That will have to serve just over a year. But it'll probably, because anything under 4 years you can get out on tag. So they've probably maybe served around about 12 months. But when they've come up for the appeals, this is when it's all come to light that they've been attacked in prison. And it's the barrister who's putting the case forward for them that has said they've been attacked on 3 occasions. But this could all be a ploy by the barristers to make it look as though they are getting attacked in prison on a regular basis so that they'll get the sentences reduced on appeal. But obviously those sentences were rejected. But getting into what happens to police officers in prison. Police officers in prison are in for a rough time, especially when they first go in and they get either remanded or sentenced for the first time on the first taste of prison. When they're going into reception area where all the inmates that have just come from the courts, whether they've been remanded, sentenced, or recalled, all different scenarios where prisoners are in the reception area in prison. And this is when the likes of the police officers will get digged out, will be found out, they'll be getting pressured, they'll be having a hard time. But 9 times out of 10, what'll happen is they'll get put on the VP wings, which is the vulnerable prisoner wing. And the screws that are processing them through reception will know exactly who they are, obviously through the paperwork and everything. Then they'll give them the option, do you want to go onto the VP wings? And the VP wings is for the S predators and people who are in fear of attack from the other inmates, people who have run up debts, and people who are snitches, grasses, those type of people go on the VP wings, which is the protection wing. And sometimes if these police officers aren't in for an S type of offence, then they might opt to go on normal or general population. And this is when they'll be found out, if people find out what they're in for. But then again, I've covered stories where some of them police officers that were working for organised crime gangs, they've went on to general population or normal location, whatever you want to refer to it as. I'll just say normal location. Then, once they're on normal location, some of the lads who were part of the OCG or have criminal connections will know that these police officers were doing favours for the OCGs. Then they'll get what you'll call a leeway. They'll be given a pass to just move along with the other prisoners, and they will not become under attack because they were working undercover for the criminals instead of undercover police. So in them scenarios, the police officers will probably be okay. But on the other hand, if they weren't part of an OCG, they weren't in for S offences, but they don't want to go and live with them type of prisoners, they will try and go unnoticed on the general population wings. But then they'll be found out, and then they'll be dealt with, then they'll be put down on the VP wings. And that's what normally happens in prison. But even down on the VP wings, they will become under attack. Because like I mentioned, there's people down there who are down there for protection for either grassing on the other inmates or running up drug debts. And these type of prisoners who are down on the VP wings will come across the police officers and they will not be taken kindly towards them. That's when they'll become under attack or they'll be dealt with. But getting back into this case a little bit, I'll talk about the actual case because obviously when I've spoke about it, a lot of you that have never heard about this case will probably be thinking, well, you want to know exactly what it was all about. So I'll talk about the perpetrator of the actual murder. And it says in the headlines, Satanist, killer Daniel Hussein jailed for 35 years for murdering Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman. Now this killer was only 19 at the time, and he promised the sacrifice of 6 women in 6 months to scoop the Mega Millions super jackpot and made Bibba Henry 46 and Nicole Smallman 27 his first victims. So he's referred to as the lottery killer who murdered the daughters of a pioneering cleric in a demonic pact to win a multi-million-pound jackpot, has been jailed for at least 35 years. Well, that was the case that the 2 police officers were supposed to be, or were working on, because Daniel Hussein, who was jailed for 35 years for murdering these 2 sisters in a London park. But it did go on to say that the judge would have given him life without parole, meaning he would have never been released from prison. But for the fact he was under 21-year-old, the sentence could not be handed down. And these two female victims, Bibba and Nicole, who Daniel had murdered, were supposed to be getting guarded by the two police officers that went on to take photos of them when they were dead and pass it around in a WhatsApp group. So this is what the case is all about and how it all comes in together. And for that, like I mentioned earlier on, they were sentenced to 2 years and 9 months. And as you can quite imagine, like I mentioned earlier on in the video, they would have had a rough time throughout the sentence. They've said they were attacked 3 times, but there is no evidence to back that up. And for me, when I read up on it, it just seems as though they were using that as an excuse to try and get the sentence reduced on appeal. But I just thought I would bring that one to light, people, because obviously it popped up when I was researching about police officers in prison, because as I mentioned, the subscribers love seeing this type of content. So I will be doing more on police officers in prison, but that is what happens to them in prison. They end up on the VP wings, but even on the VP wings, they will become attacked. Like I've done a video on David Carrick, who's been attacked in prison. And there is another police officer ex-police officer in HMP Franklin, who will, I'd imagine, be attacked at some point in his sentence for the murder of Sarah Everard. But again, people, I'll leave that one there for now. But I do want to say a massive thank you to my Patreon members for your continuing support. And if you do want to support the channel, go down, click the link in the description. And as always, if you're enjoying the content, remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Take care, people.